The meeting is now live.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Liverpool City Region Combined Authority Transport Committee meeting, the first meeting we've had for 2021. Can I start by apologising for our very delayed start? We're starting an hour later than we intended to do. Originally we were scheduled to kick off at 2 o'clock. That's down to some of the kind of technical challenges we've faced with Microsoft Teams Live, so much so we're in sort of quite high level dialogue with Microsoft themselves to try and kind of resolve some of the problems today. So genuinely sort of apologise to all members for the delayed start, apologise to all members still struggling to get into the meeting, and obviously apologise to anyone that might be watching from home wherever they are at this moment in time for the delayed start accordingly. Obviously, this is being broadcast on the Combined Authorities website. It's also being recorded, so people will be able to kind of view it after the event as well. And a little bit of housekeeping I just need to remind all members is that if all members could make sure when they wish to speak, if they indicate that in the chat box that they wish to speak, and I will then invite them in the order that they indicate. And then once that happens, if members can unmute the microphone, wait for obviously for it to pass across to them, but then have the opportunity to speak. And once they have finished their contribution, then please make sure that kind of the microphone is muted once more. Obviously, same with anyone's kind of telephones. If you've got those on your desk next to you, as I have, please make sure that they are turned to silent. Okay, if we move on to the first item, which is apologies for absence. Sean, have we had any full apologies from members that weren't attending to attend today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Margie O'Mara, MBE.
Wonderful, thanks for that, Laura. I also note the fact that kind of there's still a large number of members that are struggling to access today's meeting. I'm sure within the minutes we can appropriately acknowledge they've been attempting to get in, but obviously haven't been able to join us as kind of as participants, just to make sure that no one is marked down for not attending when they've done everything they can to participate.
Of course, make sure that's in the minutes.
Wonderful, thanks for that, Laura. Obviously, a second item is the declarations of interest. That's just the usual responsibility of myself to remind every member of the committee that if they are aware of any declaration they need to make now from the papers that they've received, or if anything occurs during the debate and discussion of the meeting that they need to declare an interest, please make sure you do so accordingly so we can notify and record those accordingly. And I'm not seeing any indications, so we'll nicely move on to the third item, which is the minutes of the last meeting. If I can thus move that those are an accurate record of our proceedings back on the 10th of December, if that's agreed, and I'm not seeing any...
Agreed.
Wonderful, that's wonderful.
Agreed.
So we can acknowledge that accordingly. Let's move into the first substantive item of today's business, and that's obviously the Mersey Tunnel Tolls recommendation for 2020-2021, and Gary Evans, our Assistant Director for Customer Delivery, is going to present this report. So Gary, I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. I just want to wish you well for the coming year, and hopefully these difficult times we can overcome those as soon as possible and return to as near as normal. The purpose of this report today, then, our tolls report, it's for the Transport Committee to consider issues that are of a social or economic nature in determining the Mersey Tunnel's tolls to be charged with effect from the 1st of April 2021. And for clarity, that make a recommendation then to the Combined Authority in setting those tolls in line with the budget setting process, which is due to take place next week. The layout of the report is similar to previous years in that the report sets out or gives background on how the tolls are set annually, linking to our RPI levels and ultimately a set of authorised toll levels which are in line with the Act itself, which members will see are actually very different from the tolls that are actually charged, and the table in section 3.10 sets out the differences between authorised toll levels per class actual toll levels charged, including both cash and FASTag tolls in there. The report in sections 311 to 313 sets out the current tunnel usage data as well as the appendix that's attached, and that includes payment methods detailed there for members to be aware of. In summary of the report, the officer's recommendations are to retain the actual toll levels charged during the current financial year moving into April 2021. So in effect, no change to those actual levels. And the various discounts that are summarised in section 3.1 of the 3.14 of the report, so the concessionary scheme and other discounts offered, free travel on Christmas Day, detailed in section 3.14, are maintained moving into the new financial year. The rest of the report should detail all of the relevant requirements around the toll setting process, and I'm happy to take questions as may be, Liam, from the floor.
Wonderful. Thanks ever so much for that, Gary, and a very good and succinct sort of presentation of that report. Are there any sort of questions or comments that anyone wants to raise at this stage? I'm not seeing any indications. Yeah. Yes, Gordon?
Just can't have me virtual hand's gone. I've been amputated.
Right, so, okay. Well, I think if people can type into the chat function, speak if they want to speak. But yeah, go on, Gordon, I'll hand over to you.
Just to thank Gary for the report. I think given the current situation, it's a sensible position to take, and I can agree with that. Could I just thank members of the committee and the officers and anyone who's watching, all the very best for the new year. And also I think it's fitting to say that we as a committee appreciate very much the work of the frontline workers on the tunnels, those that are working for asset management, and those on the tolls and those managing it. So I'd like to put my thanks forward to them.
Yeah, thanks ever so much for that, Gordon. Completely echo every element and sentiment that you just made there. I'm very mindful I'm not seeing any other indications to speak, so I will just say a few words, because I very much kind of welcome the report and the recommendation that Gary set before us today. I always think it's really important that we remember that the tunnels are a key part of our transport infrastructure and network across the region. We really don't know where we'd be if we didn't have them, so there's no point even speculating about that. But obviously their operation is significant and costs a significant amount of money. That's one of the key reasons we have a tolling regime in place, because we don't get any money from the national government to do that. I think we also should bear in mind that kind of whilst the Tunnels Act 2004 does stipulate we need to have a standalone vote on the issue of the tunnel tolls for the year ahead, that should never be seen as a completely standalone decision, because it's always part of a wider integrated budgetary conversation and decision-making process that we have each year. So it isn't as if this is a discretionary decision. We have to look at this in the perspective of what's the best thing for the operation of the tunnels, but also how that interacts with the budget of the organisation. I think one of the things that we should really sort of bear in mind, however, is the current situation in which we find ourselves across the city region, across the country, across the globe, with the sort of pandemic raging in the way that it is. And certainly at this moment in time, freezing the tolls and not making any changes that would increase the cost to people that are making essential journeys across the region, because, you know, let's be very honest about it, in the current situation, people should only be making essential journeys. So it's absolutely right that we're not adding to the burden of key workers who need to make those kind of essential journeys through the tunnels in the current situation. I think one of the other things I would sort of point to as well that's in the report that I think is very welcome. For many years, we've very much had a sort of aspiration and an ambition and a target to get as many people using the FASTag as possible. That certainly speeds up the operation of the tunnels and makes it kind of more efficient from a traffic perspective. But also, in line with Steve Rotherham's pledge for a £1 FASTag for local residents that he has delivered and sort of continues to deliver, we've always wanted to get the maximum number of local residents achieving that discount. I think we should be really pleased and proud within sort of page 13 of the report that actually almost 50% of tunnel users are local residents using the local fast tag discount. I think that's a huge achievement of Steve of his first term as our Metro Mayor. In a wider sense, the fact that kind of we've moved more sort of users not just onto the fast tag, even those that aren't residents of the city region, but also more people have moved on to bank card transactions is again a big step in the right direction, not least because of the sort of situation we find ourselves with the pandemic and the need to reduce cash handling. So I think what's been pulled forward by officers is exactly the right decision for the city region at this moment in time, and warmly welcome the recommendations that are in the report, and if I can move those accordingly, if that is agreed.
Agreed.
Excellent. And not getting any, thanks Alan, not getting any dissent there, so that's unanimous. Yeah. Okay, if we move on to our next item, which is nicely kind of dovetails, is item number 5, and that's the Merseytravel Budget Setting Report for 2021-2022, and I think John Fogarty is going to take us through this. So John, over to you. Is John with us?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute.
No, that's absolutely fine, John. Just with the technical challenges we've had
fine.
today, I'm taking nothing for granted. So over to you, John.
Apologies, there is some external noise you may pick up from me, so apologies for that. That's why I was on mute. Yeah, the budget, the report is around next year's budget. Obviously, the events of the current year cast a long shadow over this budget. Our previous assumptions no longer apply in many instances, so this budget is set within an environment of significant uncertainty and risk. The challenge faced by the combined authority, particularly around transport, is in balancing the financial losses that are being incurred because of lockdown and social distancing, etc. Is balancing those losses with the need to present a strong and robust approach to transport in particular, in order to aid the city region's recovery. So what does that mean for transport and Merseytravel? Well, the public transport landscape, as you know, has changed dramatically in the current year and maybe forever. Lockdown and social distancing has meant that patronage and revenues have fallen away, and there is now no real commercial model for either bus or rail. So everything that we previously understood, we're having to rethink. The bus industry is dependent on public subsidy from DfT and from ourselves by way of concessionary travel payments in order to continue to operate. We've had to maintain our concessionary travel payments at the pre-COVID levels this year as a result of agreements made and commitments made by DfT. That won't be the case for next year. However, if we're going to move to a position where the bus industry can recover, we do need to recognise significant risks around bus operators' liquidity and if we're to preserve the social value of the network. So any recovery on bus will be dependent on continued public subsidy in one shape or another. Situation on rail is similar, but with the important difference that locally Merseyrail has stood its own losses to date without government support that's been available to other train operating companies. The problems on rail look potentially to be more long lasting than bus, even because I think basically changing patterns of work may have a longer impact beyond COVID for rail commuters in particular, and people commuting longer distances in and out of city centres. It might not necessarily be the local experience we have here, but if large numbers of commuters nationally turn away from city centre working, particularly in London, then that takes a huge amount of money out of the rail industry pot, and that will have implications locally. For our direct services, ferries, supported bus services in particular, and the Beatles story, have all had really significant hits this year. and the reduction in revenue does look set to bleed into the next financial year. This is compounded by losses in tunnels income in the current year, and again, those look like they will continue into the new financial year. So what this means for the budget is essentially, as you've heard from Gary around tunnels, it's a holding position where we're not looking to make significant changes to fares, to tolls, or to the nature of our services until we've got further information on what the landscape will look like. Key to us will be when government is able to, or feels confident enough to end social distancing requirements on public transport, and this does seem like some time away. Obviously, the rollout of a vaccine will be absolutely critical, but it will take time even after that for the impact to work through on travel patterns. One of the many uncertainties we've still got to wrestle with is that we're not sure yet the extent or duration of government financial support for transport losses. We've benefited from those this year to offset some of our losses, and that will continue into next year, but we're not sure yet to what extent. It could be that once we have greater certainty over that post-COVID environment, that elements of this budget will need to be revised in the summer or autumn. But at the moment, as it stands, this budget is based on our best information that we have available. We're also really mindful of the financial challenge to local authorities COVID's brought, and the position that local authorities are in, so that as a result of that, the Mayor is proposing that the transport levy remains frozen this year. Again, it's also the case that the arrangements around Halton and Halton's transport levy, which sits outside what you might call the Merseytravel transport levy, remain the same for next year. This is not the right time to make any changes around Halton and the differential levy. So that will remain the same. I guess more positively, we have seen that in between lockdowns and pre-Christmas and when we were in Tier 2, numbers on the transport network did recover, probably to a greater degree than was the national position. So, and that again also tunnels recovered, obviously not to pre-COVID levels, but there was a certain strength in the bounce back, if you like, which does suggest that locally, as we know, that public transport remains fundamentally strong. And once the opportunity to grow is there again, we're quite confident that will be the case. That I've spoken mostly around the revenue budget. Again, if the report also includes the capital programme for Merseytravel and transport for next year. Obviously, the biggest element of that is the rolling stock, which you'll all be aware of, and the rolling stock will come into service next year. There's also hydrogen bus, which is a new and significant investment. There's money provided for next year. And then again, if you look through the capital programme, it shows we're continuing to invest in new stations and new facilities. Seacombe Ferry Terminal is quite a large piece of work for next year, but your investment in Headbolt Lane, Lee Green Station, St Helens, St James's Station and Access for All, and a number of other areas. Should also mention as well, it's not in the Merseytravel budget, but the Combined Authorities budget will provide significant resources for bus reform and continued work around bus reform and recovery as a mayoral priority. So that's all that I propose to say on it. I'm obviously happy to pick up any questions that you may have.
Thanks ever so much, John. Very, very good presentation of what is a very difficult situation. So I really kind of pay tribute to you and all of your team and officers across the organisation and all of our constituent districts. It's been a real team effort to pull together what we've got in front of us today. Before I sort of add my own sort of substantive comments, I know Gordon's indicated to speak, and if anyone else wants to add their contribution, please sort of notify me in the chat box, but I'll hand over to Gordon first.
Thank you. Yes, it's a good presentation on what the current situation is. And one of the things I'm pleased to see is in very uncertain times, we presented in the short term as much certainty as we've been able to. I think it's important in that regard to be able to step that. What I'm not so happy about, and it's not really a question for John unless he wishes to comment, I'm extremely disappointed that we've had no EMA for our rail services. It's a real blow for us, and I think from my point of view, I read the news that London had got TfL. They've got 1.7 or 1.8 billion pounds, and I can't see where levelling up comes into this equation for us here in the Liverpool City region. I'm really quite annoyed that we seem to have been missed out on where support should be given. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. I don't know if John wants to come back. I could certainly respond to that point very much in the same vein as well, if that you want to. But John, do you want to say anything about that point that Gordon's raised? Or?
I think all I can say is that we remain in dialogue with Merseyrail and DFT and Merseyrail's parent companies on this issue. It's I think that's all I should say on that.
No, that's absolutely fine, John. I will sort of be a bit more verbose in a wider funding settlement perspective. I agree with Gordon's points entirely about the Merseyrail network unjustifiably being missed out from emergency recovery management arrangement as every other train operating network has in the country. But I think there's a wider point as well that Gordon hit the nail on the head. Sort of Transport for London has received a funding package for the next 6 months of 1.8 billion, not disputing the fact that London needs a suitable funding package to maintain its transport network, but that's a significantly larger amount than has gone to city regions like our own. If you look at our internal work, for a similar timescale, we've been given a funding settlement of £80 million coming to the city regions network. So per head of population, our kind of emergency grant for the transport network is 3 times less than the per head of population equivalent for the London area. That is completely and utterly unjustifiable and quite frankly insulting when we talk about the levelling up agenda, and that cannot be allowed to sort of continue into the long term. And I do know it's something that Steve Rotherham, as our Metro Mayor, is pursuing actively with government on that point specifically. Alan's indicated to speak, so I'll bring Alan in accordingly.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. No, I just asking, why are we left out of this? It seems a bit strange to me. And I mean, as a Conservative, I'm happy to challenge the government on this because I can't see any particular reason why we are being left out.
And I think that's exactly the point, actually, at the end of the day, Alan, that there is no kind of rationale as to why we are so unfairly being financed. So it's not just our region. Yes, there's the specifics of Merseyrail, but every city region outside of London is being funded to a similar meagre level compared to London. And I'm pleased that, on a kind of a non-partisan basis, you can see that as well, because I think everyone sort of in the north of England understands that regardless of their own political affiliation, that actually things should be done much more equitably, and it's that kind of failure to fund us equitably that has held us back for so long accordingly. So it's just sort of unacceptable. Anything that you can do within the sort of confines of the Tory party would be welcomed, because it's something that we're continuing to fight on behalf of the city region for. It just cannot stand, particularly when we start focusing into a post-pandemic world where we genuinely want to build back better.
Exactly.
That will necessitate a reallocation of priorities and funding in this country. No question about that. That is what has to happen. Okay.
Well, if there's anything you want me to try and do, I certainly will try, because after all, I'm a northerner first, above all else.
Well, we certainly kind of appreciate that northern unity, Alan, and we may well sort of take you up on that premise.
Thanks a lot, Liam. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Alan. I'm not seeing any other indications to speak, so I'll just sort of tie up some of the bits that I was sort of going to mention as well. But other than just to say that kind of, I think, look, this is the very best budget that could be pulled together by the team in the circumstances in which we find it. Let's be very, very blunt about it. In the current situation, the pandemic is still raging. We don't know exactly how it will pan out next. We've got good forecasts, but we really need to kind of watch this space in terms of how this is sort of continuing. And the fact that we're putting in place a budget that balances, but a very difficult budget, is a very good one in the sort of circumstances. So completely right that we're not putting additional burden onto our districts by freezing the levy at this moment in time. Completely right that kind of at this moment in time, the fares and the fees and the charges within the sort of budgets are going to be frozen again, but that's something that potentially we may need to sort of revisit further in the year, and once the kind of pandemic may have eased and changed, as we are all hoping, with the sort of rolling out of a vaccine. So all in all, I think a very strong budget in very, very difficult circumstances. So if I can move the recommendations in the report, if that's agreeable.
Agreed.
Okay,
Great.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to our next item, which is item number 6, which is the South Liverpool Global Gateway Eastern Access Corridor. And Andy, I think, is going to take us through this. Andy Sawyer, our Key Route Network Manager.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so I'm just going to briefly run through an update report for this committee with regards to the project. So just as a very brief recap, the project, the Eastern Access Corridor, is a new multimodal transport route that will hopefully better connect the wider South Estuary area of the vicinity of Liverpool John Lennon Airport and link the strategic highway network, public transport networks and sustainable transport activity. It should also support growth of the South Liverpool economy, including the delivery of surrounding development opportunities which could come on the back of this project. So it's really to just give you an update of where the project's development is. So back in August, the Combined Authority appointed a consultant to support the development of the outline business case for the scheme, with the option to subsequently take forward the full business case should we be successful in finding a funding route. As part of the development, we've re-engaged with the steering group. The steering group comprises of Combined Authority officers, the consultant and representatives from each of the district authorities which are impacted upon or will seek direct benefit from the project. And then there's also some of the key stakeholders linked, such as Peel, John Lennon Airport, etc. So item 3.4 sets out some of the key activities that have been undertaken since the Commission started back in August. I'm not going to list every one that's detailed there, it's in the report. But predominantly a lot of the work is to review the work that was completed as part of the strategic outline business case and now take that forward and develop that and start developing the shortlisted options for the project. Just in terms of programme, the original programme that was set out by the consultant was looking to have the draft OBC outline business case ready for autumn of 2021. However, there was some caveats with that initial programme that was submitted, and one of the main things being in relation to COVID and the impact that could have, particularly surrounding consultation and engagement. So that's now been reviewed, and there's been a decision to make a longer period for that consultation and engagement, which will now hopefully take place later into the summer. And fingers crossed, with the introduction of the vaccine programme, etc., we may even get some face-to-face consultation, which will be a plus as opposed to having to do everything remotely. This now potentially puts back the submission of the outline business case to the summer of 2022. But if we can bring that forward, we will do. There's no particular risk in that delay or potential delay, because currently we haven't actually secured a funding route for this project, so it doesn't jeopardise any potential funding opportunities. Just in terms of risks, generally, risks and opportunities are being considered throughout the development of this project and being closely monitored with the steering group. And to date, we've not identified any key risks. And in relation to the performance of the consultant, I'm pleased to report that it's been an excellent start to the commission. Some strong relationships have already been formed and we're working well together. So 3.8 just briefly sets out a short look ahead of the key activities for the next 3 months, which is refinement of the scheme objectives, completion of the consultation and engagement strategy, which will be shared with the CA's comms team to make sure that they're happy with the content of that, refinement and development of the traffic model, which is supporting the project, and again developing the shortlisted design layouts for the scheme. So in conclusion, it's really to just provide that update to the committee. The plan is that as we develop and we probably get through to the consultation stage, I'm proposing to bring a further update back to the committee. And I would offer any questions, I'd like to receive any questions from the committee.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for that, Andy. That's really useful. Whilst I'm waiting for any kind of indications, thanks for the update. Very helpful. I think there's lots of questions I know lots of members would have in a more detailed setting. So one of the things I was going to sort of request is possibly if we have a kind of a detailed member briefing on this, so we can see in much more granular fashion what the scheme is coming together as, and we can sort of get into it in kind of a more detailed perspective. Fully appreciate we're still at OBC level, so it isn't as fully kind of worked out, but I think that to me feels like the sort of suitable next step around this, and I'm not seeing any other indications to request to speak, so if I can thus move those recommendations, if that's agreed.
Agreed.
Thanks for that.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thanks,
If we
Chair.
then move on to the last agenda item before we have public questions, that's item 7, which is the submission of evidence to the Transport Select Committee, Major Transport Infrastructure Projects, Appraisal and Delivery. And I think we've got Suzanne who's going to present this report for us.
Effectively, this report basically sets out a proposed submission of written evidence to the Transport Select Committee inquiry that was launched in December and on major transport infrastructure projects. The inquiry's got 5 main areas of interest: strategy and priorities, appraisal and funding, oversight, accountability and governance, cost, and capacity and skills. The full terms of reference of the call for evidence are set out in paragraph 3.6 of the report, and the draft response is appended to the report and summarised in paragraphs 4.3. I won't take you through the detail of what's in that because I'm sure you'll have had a chance to read it. The lead-in time between the publication of the call for evidence and agenda publication was a little bit tight. So before I take any questions on the proposed response, I just wanted to highlight a number of proposed changes. I have run these through past Councillor Robinson and Friel, so just to sort of alert you to that one. I've made some minor text changes, essentially around pruning it to get it down to around 3,000 words, which is effectively the maximum that the Transport Select Committee like, and I think at the last count it was about 3,700. None of those changes materially alter the substance of the response, but there are 1 or 2 more substantial edits that I'd just like to quickly highlight you to. In paragraph 3 of the draft response, after the text talking about net zero carbon emitting city region by 2040, I've added a little paragraph there to set out that delivering on the long-term opportunities as set out in our local industrial strategy and our vision for a globally competitive, environmentally responsible, socially inclusive economy by addressing health inequality and the climate emergency are mission critical to achieving our vision. In section 9, I've highlighted the Halton curve as an example of the GRIP processes and how railway costs can escalate. Paragraph 11 as it stands, as I've actually deleted, but the last 2 sentences relating to the clarity of future funding, I've moved to the beginning of paragraph 12. I've included a brand new paragraph on paragraph 11 that specifically addresses the point about how major transport projects can be delivered to ensure the government meets its decarbonisation to 2050 net zero targets. I can read that out in full if members wish, but I won't at this stage. Paragraph 15, I've introduced just a highlighted paragraph before I go into the main text, just to highlight that basically we're drawing the committee's attention to a number of published studies, but the need here is to challenge government as to what can be done differently in the future to ensure that the lessons learnt through such studies are actually put into practice. Paragraph 16, I've truncated quite a bit and deleted much of the first sentence. This is one relating to Dame Colette Bowes' review and saying she concluded that there was no single overarching cause, rather than go through the detail there, because the Select Committee can pull that up if they want to. In paragraph 18, all of the second sentence and the accompanying bullets are to be deleted because it goes into far too much detail. And again, the committee can pull up the report if they're interested. Same applies as to paragraphs 19 and 20, and the over-detailed bullets there have been simplified. In paragraph 22, I've deleted the whole of the last sentence. I've deleted the whole of paragraph 28, and in paragraph 30, the list of company names at the end of the first section is going to be deleted. Now, if it helps, I can sort of circulate that to members via committee so that they can see the final version of that. But I just wanted to run you through the substantive changes that I have made to the version that you've all seen attached to the committee papers as published. So with that in mind, happy to take any questions or any issues that members have got on the proposed written submission.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Suzanne. And obviously, yes, I think it probably would be helpful if we could circulate that that sort of so far proposed amended document, purely because I was trying to keep up with the bits that you were saying, and I've seen a copy of the amended one. And actually a point I was going to raise with regard to paragraph 20, I don't need to raise now because that's been deleted anyway. But seriously, if I can thank you and the team for everything you've done over Christmas trying to pull this together, because it's always a more difficult time of year to do it, but I do think what we've got is a really good response. But I've got John indicating that he wants to come in. So John Stockton.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much. Thanks, Suzanne, for your report and the Cook's tour through it. Yeah, obviously the updated version will be extremely helpful. I'm just very keen. A couple of points I wish to raise. But we hear a lot of talk about government about levelling up and not levelling down. And yeah, I have really serious concerns about the governance of this, please. We need to know about the devolution of power to the north in terms of our judgment. Clearly, most of the decisions are going to be made by central government, but if they're genuine about the so-called northern powerhouse, and I doubt very much they are, because I understand from an earlier conversation today that they reduced the amount of money for the northern powerhouse, transport for the north, sorry, from 10 million to 4 million. So that's a real concern in terms of the governance. I'm just wondering, and Liam may wish to comment on this, whether we need to put something in a bit stronger about that in terms of the governance for the north, so that decisions that are made on behalf of the north are made by people who know what they're talking about. That's with reference to paragraphs 4 to 6 on pages 49 to 50. My next comment is about the skills strategy deficit which we seem to have, and that refers to paragraphs 24, 25, 26 and 27. It seems that we clearly have got a skills deficit in terms of the amount of jobs that will be available to people for these projects. And I'm just wondering, having had a conversation earlier today, and I thank Councillor McKinley for this, for raising this, we talk very much about a skills strategy within the Liverpool City region. I wonder how prevalent that is right across the rest of the north, and whether we've got a coherent strategy in terms of the skills and knowledge, etc., that young people will need to actually access the jobs that will become available as a consequence of these future works. So again, I'm just wondering if that just needs a little bit firming up within the document. Some food for thought. Liam no doubt will have some comments, but thank you very much for listening, and Happy New Year to everybody who have not already said Happy New Year to. Thank you.
Brilliant, and Happy New Year to you as well, John. Suzanne, do you want to come back on John's points and questions?
Yeah, happy to. I think we have picked up on sort of the levelling up issues. Oh gosh, I seem to have frozen. In a couple of places. I think one of the points that we did try to make was in terms of the 4 billion levelling up fund that the government announced as part of the spending review. That whilst that was welcome, one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face is the fact that it's being controlled by Westminster and it's a bidding process. How is that actually going to work? We're really not sure about that. So we have made a specific point in the response that, you know, that completely flies in the face of the central tenet of levelling up, that it's putting the power and the devolution to the north. How does that actually work? It simply doesn't. And one of the other issues that we've raised within the response as well is picking up on the Northern Transport Acceleration Council. We're still less than clear as to what that body is actually going to deliver. We don't necessarily we're not against the fact that they want to sort of put some kind of attention on the delivery of schemes across the north of England, but we're really not sure how the overlay with Transport for the North is going to work in that respect. So some kind of sort of transparency on what that council's supposed to deliver, how it's actually going to interact with TfN, and how the funding for TfN is going to sort of stack up if the decisions are being taken by the Northern Transport Acceleration Council. These are things that we really just don't understand, and that we have tried to sort of pick out within the response as to areas that just don't tie in with the whole concept of levelling up. In terms of the skills strategy, it's something that we are aware of, and we could have written chapter and verse on skills alone, but sort of again trying to sort of keep it down to the 3,000 word. It's really, really hard to sort of pick out all the points that you want within the sort of the limited ways. So we can sort of pick up that there are sort of knock-on implications for the north as a whole there, and we've sort of highlighted a couple of projects where we know that there are issues and things that it doesn't help, and if again it sort of goes back down to sort of the principles of why Transport for the North was set up. If they were allowed to sort of develop some kind of sort of pan-northern skills strategy, and then sort of look at how the delivery of schemes across the north was going to be delivered, that would be helpful. But again, whilst we're not entirely sure what the long-term future for Transport for the North is, it really doesn't have enough agenda.
No, I agree.
You want to add on to that one, Liam?
Well, sorry, Liam. No, you speak. Sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine, because I agree with everything that everyone's sort of said. Look, it's very simple philosophically to me that kind of decisions are always made that are better and stronger and in the interests of areas when they're done at the most local of levels. That's why kind of, certainly the devolution of power as much as possible to the city region level makes ultimate sense, but on kind of significant infrastructure and transport systems and schemes that go beyond our boundaries, it makes sense to vest that at a northern level and sort of through bodies like Transport for the North. So it's very, very worrying to see kind of how Transport for the North budget has been cut, and also it's not clear from how the NTAC will dovetail with TfN, because absolutely at the end of the day we need something that works as a sort of seamless fashion. So certainly kind of making sure we strongly sort of recognise that in the response back to the Transport Select Committee in Parliament, I think is a very good and suitable addition, because we have very much sort of put in there about the need for equitable funding, but with equitable devolved funding you also need equitable devolved power and autonomy to do it properly in the best interests of the people that we represent.
Yeah, thanks Liam, thanks very much.
I've got Gordon as well wants to come in.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I heard this or not, so a bit for clarification and then just to make a thing, but we've got something about the influences that the cost of transport, the factors, public-private partnership, has that gone out?
It has, Gordon. It's paragraph 20. It's been deleted.
I took it to be something different, but since one of our colleagues has said to us earlier, it tricked my mind, but I wasn't sure if I heard that right. It's a great report to be honest about it. I like it, enjoyed reading it. It actually helped me sleep quite well, Suzanne.
Thank you. Yeah, the paragraph 20 was the danger of cut and paste, because I did just sort of cut and paste the primary recommendations, and then as you sort of read them back in context, thinking, yeah, it's a little bit dated now in places, so it has been pruned back, so it is still relevant and does make sense.
I wonder if in the research that you've done for this, you found that some of the things that's been happening lately, and I know that from our shadow team on the Treasury, the National Audit Office, many of the recommendations they made have never been followed. So hence we get into buying services from companies that have never run a ferry service before, or we buy PPE. And it's a real concern that maybe particularly in the rail industry, we're not getting the value for money we should be.
think that's certainly one of the points that sort of in one of the edits that I took you through earlier. I think what I tried to sort of set out there was sort of basically the results of me doing a small amount of sort of desk-based research as to what existing evidence there was to support some of those points. But then it became very apparent that what we needed to do was highlight why we were giving that evidence and what point we were trying to make. And it really was that it's all well and good that these studies are continuing, but what really needs to happen is for government to actually take notice and start looking at what research there is, looking at what's been told and actually learning from those. As you say, it's all well and good the National Audit Office coming out with some recommendations, but if governments then just completely ignore them, then what was the point?
Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks for that, Gordon. I'm not seeing any other further indications, so
Liam,
can I...
Liam,
Yes?
sorry, it's Jed. I can't get into me.
No, it's fine, Jed. Go
Yeah,
forward.
Thanks, Liam. Appreciate that. I mean, I know local authorities are a long way down the food chain when it comes to governments and where we are, but once this document is put together, and the change is probably a little bit late for the 15th of January going in, but nevertheless welcome. But when we do eventually start the process, it will be important to involve those local authorities within the city region that are affected by these things, because what we don't want to do is go through a whole host of time, effort and work and then come across stoppers from local authorities. So I sincerely hope that we do have that involvement as these projects go forward. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jed. Very, very, very vital points that are kind of part of being of how we need to operate and how we do sort of always intend to operate at the city region. Okay, because I'm not seeing any further indications, can I move the recommendations that I believe are on page 43 of the report, if that's agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, if we move on to the very final item we have to deal with today, and that's public question time. We've had two questions from Mr. Jacob Harris, and I think, Laura, are you going to read those out for us?
I am, yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
So as you just said, members have received two questions from Mr. Jacob Harris, and he has asked them to be read out on his behalf. Question 1. Recently, Merseytravel have put the X1 bus service, Liverpool 1 to Holton Hospital, out to tender due to the impending withdrawal of the Arriva service from 24th of January. However, I have noticed at present, with the exception of the young person's My Ticket, Merseytravel season tickets are not currently valid within Holton. So what I would like to know is, will Merseytravel tickets become valid in Holton to cover the X1, or will special ticketing provision be in place for this service? I will pause at this point to see if Councillor Robinson would like to give a response.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and obviously we'll respond to Mr. Harris within the sort of timescales with a written response, but obviously with the exception of My Ticket, the full Merseytravel suite of tickets are valid on the service. That's currently operated by one of our participating operators in the scheme. However, obviously the multimodal, multi-operator tickets don't currently work in Holton. That is something we do want to sort of, in the fullness of time, expand, but we don't actually currently have a time scale for that inclusion, so it is something we want to work on, but it isn't anything we've got a definitive time scale that we'd be able to give to Mr. Harris on. And happy to take the second question, Laura.
Thank you, Chair. His second question is, recently on my commutes to and from work, I have noticed there are still a lot of people not wearing face masks on the bus, even though it is legally required. The main culprits are teenagers aged 12 to 15. What are Merseytravel and the bus companies doing to ensure compliance with the law on face masks?
Okay, and that's an absolutely vital question, and one that I get asked by lots of people across the region on a very regular basis in the current situation. Obviously, again, Mr. Harris will get a detailed written response from us within the timescales, and it is something that we are focusing on, because Merseytravel's officers working through our Travel Safe team are regularly kind of monitoring bus services to see how compliance is occurring with face coverings. From all of our monitoring exercises and our kind of targeted operations, working with people like the British Transport Police, but also Merseyside Police and others, we are actually seeing quite a high level of compliance. A lot of the exercise we've done have seen 92% compliance, which is very positive. And we are kind of, with our advertising and messaging, things like Rethink Travel, but other targeted campaigns that we're doing, making sure we kind of continue to push out that vital public safety message about how, if you are on public transport, unless you've got an exemption, you should be wearing a face covering. Obviously, the compliance factor and enforcement ultimately sits with Merseyside Police on the bus network, or the British Transport Police on the rail network. However, we are doing those targeted joint operations through TravelSafe, and one of the things we would say to anyone that's reporting concerns to us, if you can share any of the kind of details with regard to the service that you were on or that you use and you've seen these issues and things like times of day, we can certainly look to do a targeted operation, so we can try to kind of focus on any areas and any particular services that might have more of an issue around this. So as I said at the start of both responses, Mr. Harris will receive a written response to his questions within the next 10 days. Okay, if we move on to the final substantive items, item 9, petitions and statements, we haven't received any this time. And item number 10, any other urgent business approved by the chair, there isn't any. I will just finish up to say and thank everyone for their patience, whether that's anyone at home watching or whether it's any of our members that have been able to join the meeting. I do know that a number of our members haven't been able to join the meeting despite valiant attempts with the IT to join. It's obviously been pretty frustrating with the sort of IT challenges that we've had, which go much beyond the responsibility of the Combined Authority, I must say. And obviously it's something that we hope won't be repeated again. I'll joke that I don't tend to have a drink in the week, but I might make an exception today after the sort of trials and tribulations that we've had putting on today's meeting. The final thing, and by far and away the most important thing that I always need to say in the current environment, is just to sort of wish everyone, your family, your friends, all the very best, making sure that you are safe and well at this very sort of difficult time, and particularly extend that sort of very focus to everyone that's working on the front line in the transport network, and making sure that kind of those essential journeys that key workers have to make at the moment are able to be made. So all the very, very best to everybody out there. Please stay safe and well, and I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting on the 4th of March. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Liam. Thank